Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we get you set for tonight's matchup between the Bucks and the Denver Nuggets and take a look at the fit for a couple pieces on this Bucks team. Camille and I dig into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank everybody for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can subscribe for free and get your day started with the all-new Locked On Bucks newsletter. Sign up for free at lockedondaily.com. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. So coming out of the show from yesterday, Camille, it seemed like there were a lot of questions and complaints, feedback on a couple of players. One, I suppose we'll save because it was a bulk of the complaints. We'll save for the next segment. But you and I talked about, too, Kyle Kuzma was one player that stood out in that game against the Houston Rockets. And, we mentioned it's still kind of a work in progress for Kuz to see how does this offense fit in now that Giannis is back, and just the overall approach for Kyle Kuzma. You have no gripes about what he has given you on the defensive end of the floor, but what we've started to experience, and granted the Bucks were winning games where this was still an issue, is it's still, I hesitate to use the word clunky, but it's still very much a, how does this work with both of these guys? Is you've kind of relegated Kyle Kuzma not fully into a catch and shoot role, but we've seen a lot more of that when that's frankly not his strength.
It truly isn't. We've talked about the shooting numbers for Kyle Kuzma. I know his catch and shoot numbers have been a bit better in Milwaukee than they have been this season. I think you said he's up to like 35% on catch and shoots in Milwaukee so far. So it's above what his season average is for the 3-point shot alone. So there has been some progress there, but the question is that the most useful way to use Kyle Kuzma in this offense? And then the other question I have is, how much more do you need from Kyle Kuzma with the understanding that your offense is going to be running through Giannis and for Dame? Like, what is the role of a Kyle Kuzma? Because one thing about getting rid of Chris Middleton was the idea of like, hey, it's no longer really a big three situation here in Milwaukee. It's really a duo that we're trying to build around and put the best talent around them so that Giannis and Dame can really thrive going forward, with the two of them taking the bulk of the shot attempts, with the two of them using their gravity to create open shots for others. So it's like, what do you need for Kyle Kuzma to do in order for you to be successful? Him being able to knock down those catch and shoot threes is a part of it. But it's like, how else can you utilize him? Because like, I can't remember which game it was, but it was one of the ones recently where he catches in the corner. Instead of taking the shot, he has a clear drive because the closeout was just a little bit too slow. Easy bucket at the rim for Kyle Kuzma. Like, how else can the Bucks utilize his athleticism and his length to be able to create easy buckets for this offense? Because as we've discussed, and everydayers know, the Bucks offense has been a bigger problem this season than their defense has. So like, what can Kyle Kuzma do, and how can the Bucks utilize him to try to help that a little bit more going forward?
It certainly wasn't Tuesday night's game in Houston against the Rockets, where Kuzma unfortunately had back-to-back missed shots at the rim. And, part of the genesis of this discussion is what we mentioned. It was a big talking point, or one of the talking points coming out of that Rockets game, but it was one of those holdover questions that we got on the mailbag as well, of how do you think Kyle Kuzma's fit in so far? How do you think he'll fit in with Giannis once he's back? Because that was kind of, the thing that stood out is, man, this guy, everything that Doc Rivers had mentioned about Kyle Kuzma's offense and defense in transition, I think that and his passing ability, which Doc has spoken out about a couple of times already, those are two things that a lot of Bucks fans who were not, frankly, watching Wizards games, nor should they have, and didn't really. And look, let's also point out Kyle Kuzma wasn't playing this way with the Wizards, and I think he would even tell you that as well. He's talked about the importance of hey, I get to play winning basketball again, that we've seen more to his game than even if you were watching and scouting him on the Wizards, you wouldn't have necessarily seen. Those are two things that have stood out, but there was that underlying question of how does this fit next to Giannis once Giannis is back? And that part is still very much up in the air and a work in progress. Like there's going to have to be some type of happy medium where it's not just Kyle Kuzma waiting for catch and shoot opportunities, but you also have to recognize, look, I'm not telling you don't roll to the basket. Sometimes we need that spacing for Giannis, though.
Yes, the timing of knowing when to cut, when to move off ball. And we've seen iterations of this Bucks team in the past where off ball movement felt like non-existent at times. And you've been seeing a bit more of it, but it's just about finding the right times to cut because there have been situations in games since Giannis has returned and Kyle Kuzma has been in the lineup where the spacing just kind of gets crowded really quick because Kuz thinks he should be cutting at a moment where Giannis is like posting down the mid post, and it just gets a little bit too congested in that moment. So just figuring it out. And to be clear to anybody listening who might take this conversation as us saying like it's not working with Kyle Kuzma or anything like that, like it's natural for it to be bumpy when you're inserting a new player into a lineup next to your franchise star. Like that's going to happen along the way, and it's just something to keep an eye on as they continue to get used to it, to see if we see progress from the way that they're utilizing Kyle Kuzma going forward. Like, Justin, do you think, like, in your head, is there like a certain number for Kyle Kuzma where you're like, if he can average 15 and 10, the Bucks can be in a good place? Do you think of it as like a certain number for Kyle Kuzma to hit, or is it more so for you just kind of like whatever this particular game requires, we need him to do? It's not necessarily like a hard and fast number that you're looking for, but just more so of like the actual way the play is unfolding in front of you.
So it's an interesting question. Did you look up his numbers before asking
I did
that?
not.
Okay. How many points do you think he's averaged so far playing with the Bucks?
As a Buck, probably like around like 12, probably around like 12, 13 points or something like that.
He averaged 15.2 points per game in 32 games with the Wizards. And he shot 28% on threes, 49% on twos. He was a 47% field goal shooter. Perhaps the most important number to track is free throw shooting, which was 60%. With the Bucks, he is averaging 15.3 points per game, nearly identical in 8 games. His field goal percentage, 42%, just as it was with the Wizards. His 3-point attempts per game, 5.1. He attempted 5 with the Wizards. His 3-point percentage is 29% versus the 28%, and he's shooting 50% on twos. Unfortunately, the free throws, 60% with the Wizards, 66 or 67 if we round up with the Bucks. So he has pretty much been the same guy. I think what stands out obviously is defense and how that changes things for you. If before looking that up, if he could average 10 rebounds a game, great, especially when we see games like what happened against the Houston Rockets. But that is one of the notable things. He's averaging more than 7 rebounds a game with the Bucks, and it was just under 6 with the Wizards. So if he can give you 14 and 8, I'm happy with it. Because again, it really boils down to the defense and how much that shows up and how much it allows you to change things. You can't just be a nothing on offense, but if he gives you the numbers that he was given the Washington Wizards, and I think the bigger thing is you love the efficiency to tick upward, but it at least hasn't been that type of clunky, well, I got to totally reshape the way that I played. Like by the numbers, offensively, he's been the exact same guy. It's just the defense that he's brought you is what's really stood out.
Which it fits in what the Bucks are looking to do this year. Again, leaning into physicality, leaning into having size. It does make me wonder some because we've seen some Kuzma Sims minutes. If Bobby Portis, when he comes back and what the rotation looks like with Bobby Portis next to him, like for all of the things that
like a Kuzma Portis Sims.
Yes, which I know the first thought is like, where's the defense in that particular lineup?
Well, I mean, the two guys around Bobby Portis.
Yeah, so it could be an interesting thing to look at with that because of the spacing that Portis can provide. I don't know if you would run those two without Dame on the court or how that will look with who else you have around them, but If it's those two and you throw out, I don't know, man, this actually now sounds like an adventure lineup. It's like Kevin Porter Jr. out there with Kuz and
You're just doing a
BP.
Mad Libs Bucks lineups here.
Right. But the thing I'm thinking about with Bobby and what he brings to the table, outside of him being able to space the floor, create his own shot, is Bobby does hit the glass pretty hard. And I know during his time away from the team, while he was dealing with the loss of his grandmother and being with his family, he mentioned tuning in the Bucks games and just seeing like, we got to crash the boards. And I know when I get back, that's something I'm going to have to do like exceptionally well for this team. And he was playing with a really increased vigor around grabbing boards before his suspension. And I'm just trying to think too of like, how does that look when Kuz comes back in those minutes? Because Bobby played about, I don't know what his season average is for minutes, but I'm guessing it's somewhere in 20, 23 minutes, I would assume, this season. So like, how do you reinsert those minutes too once he gets back?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to one of the conversations that we had weeks ago when we were talking about the Bucks looking for defense in the front court, and just kind of revisiting. It's a good thing to have Bobby Portis on your team. Like, you need to be able to play different ways. And again, you go back to the summer, which leads us into the next player we want to talk about. When everybody assumed that just means, okay, well, it means you don't have Brook Lopez on your team and you bring in a center that can switch. Like, no, it means you can play lineups with Brook Lopez. You can play lineups with Bob. You can play lineups with Jericho Sims and Kyle Kuzma next to Giannis. Like, that's going all the way back to the summer. That's the versatility piece that I think the front office and Doc Rivers were talking about. And we're starting to see some of it. It's just kind of been 2 steps forward, a step backward of late here for this Bucks team, because Bobby Portis goes out for personal reasons. Bobby Portis goes out with the suspension, Giannis with the injuries. That is, as soon as you start to piece it together and get an extended look, something like that pops up for this team. I mentioned it does lead into a larger conversation that seems to be top of mind for a lot of Bucks fans, and it was certainly prevalent in the chat when we did our show yesterday. So we'll get into a big discussion centered around one of the Bucks' biggest players coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You'll love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you'll never feel like you missed your chance. And plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers to FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, I suppose it's time, Camille. So yesterday's show, there was a lot of, is vitriol too strong of a word? There's a lot of negativity around Brook Lopez, and that's kind of been a constant through the years. Look, I'm not going to pretend that Brook Lopez is fleet of foot and that he's able to keep up on the perimeter with guys. There were certainly moments, and you can cherry pick anything with just about any player. There were certainly moments in that Rockets game where you could say, hey, Brook Lopez beat at the perimeter, taken all the way to the rim. It's not Brook Lopez's job to be defending out there. And again, the age-old tiresome argument of how can he be 7 feet and only get 4 rebounds a game? It's because look at the rebounding rate when he's on the floor and what he's asked to do. I'm going to die on this hill. I think you will as well. When Brook Lopez hangs him up and calls it a career, I think Bucks fans are going to look back much more fondly on him than a portion of them do presently. But these moves at the trade deadline, I really thought this would kind of take away a lot of that chatter and at least cool the waters, because just as we said moments ago, this is the versatility that you envisioned, where it's not just Giannis and Brook, and we can swap out Bobby for one of those guys. It's a guy like Jericho Sims. It's Kyle Kuzma. And we haven't really seen Giannis at the 5 next to Kyle Kuzma and others, but you now have those things on paper that you can go to. I think this was the thought behind all of it. And yet here we are with more of the Brook is old, Brook is washed, Brook needs to retire. Why can't Brook get rebounds? Like, I really thought we were past this, especially after the trade deadline.
You're an optimistic guy, I can see. People always talk to me and like, oh, Camille, you're always so positive and optimistic. But Justin, you have that title on you today for thinking after the trade deadline that the Brook Lopez chatter would turn a bit. But not seriously, Brook Lopez is getting older. Like, we know the weaknesses in Brook Lopez's game right now. He is not a perfect player at what age is 36 years old right now. He's slow of foot, which is part of why when you think of how the Bucks want to run their defense, the whole idea of it is that we can try to keep Brook as close to the basket while having other guys rotate out if someone needs to close out on shooters. Keep Brook as close to the basket as possible, and good things are going to happen. The flip side to that is when opposing offenses, their game plan is like, we're going to draw him out of the paint and make him defend on the perimeter, which is part of the reason why that first Knicks game stands out so much, because Brook was trying to check Karl Towns and Cat was able to beat him off the dribble. Cat was able to do whatever he wanted in that situation, which brings us to this trade deadline of let's try to have more options on how we're able to defend certain teams. We've mentioned it before. Every playoff series is not going to be for everybody. And this is not me saying I think that Brook's going to get completely played off the floor, but it might be a situation in the playoff series where Brook's not getting 30 minutes in the series, but he's going to get about 15 minutes per game, whatever the split turns out to be. And for the Bucks to have different options is a good thing, because Brook Lopez is still a very useful player. We went over the exercise this summer of like, if you replace Brook Lopez, who else is out there that's going to give you the rim protection plus the 3-point shooting? And I know people are over the 3-point shooting for Brook Lopez, saying he shoots too many of them. He's shooting about 5 threes a game, and he's making like 37% of them. Like, that's right above league average of what you expect from somebody who's making threes. Now, if you want to question the type of threes at times, I can definitely get on board with that argument of want to see him with his feet set more often, or want to see him take a step in for some of those threes. I can understand that argument, but Brook Lopez being able to stretch the floor is a weapon the Bucks have to continue to use going forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough because it's clearly the back 9 for Brook Lopez in his career. Yep. He's 36, as you mentioned. He is, I believe, days away, well, a month away from being 37 years old. April 1st is his 37th birthday. So we're starting to get up there. And I point all that out to say this, Camille, as I get ready to duck here. I would have no problem extending him this summer. Now, granted, the $23 million figure is something I'm sure the Bucks want to bring down. And I think you, me, and Frank have talked about this before, or maybe it was you, me, and Van. Number closer to the full mid-level exception, if bring it down to that, which pretty close to trims his annual salary in half. I'm perfectly fine with that for 2 years. He still has value. You still need to plan for life after Brook Lopez. And guys, as much as we love him in the athleticism, Jericho Sims is not the Bucks starting center next year. The pipe dream of, we'll just sign Miles Turner. Like, well, that's assuming the Indiana Pacers decide we've already invested money elsewhere in Pascal Siakam and Halliburton. They paid TJ McConnell and other guys. They paid other players on that roster and just say, let's let them walk. It's going to cost you a lot of money. And it's not going to replicate everything that Brook Lopez has brought to this team. It's certainly not going to replicate the rim protection and defense. Can he move better? Sure, because he's younger. Is he just as good, maybe even a better 3-point shooter? Yeah, but you're paying a lot of money for a guy that I think, in all things considered, is a wash, maybe a slight upgrade there over Brook Lopez. So the larger part is, you got to start to think about what do we do next? And it's not as simple as Giannis plays center because, we know how he feels about that. But
Mhm.
in the meantime, it's all about, I've talked before about limit your liabilities. I think that's what they've done here because it's not to single out Brooks specifically, but again, earlier in the week, you and I talked about it. When you watched this team, you knew the age was up there and you knew the Bucks play a slower style and they're an older team. But it wasn't until you injected youth and you saw, oh, okay, so this is what it's like to have more than just Giannis and Andre Jackson Jr. running up and down the floor, that you really started to realize where they were and what needed to change. And I think that's what is going to help Brook Lopez the most, in that he's the guy that's the older, and I know you got other guys in their 30s, but he's the guy that's the older, slower, more athleticism around him. And it's not just, the conversation last year of if you got 2 or 3 guys on the floor at any time that you can target defensively, you're in trouble. If you got 2 or 3 guys on the floor at any time that you feel like they're going to play really slow, you're in trouble because teams are going to run on you on makes. And how many times did we see that the last 2 years? That's not the case anymore. And I think as we start to get deeper and deeper into this, I hope, I should say, not think, people are going to start to see that and think, okay, I recognize where we need him. I know there's going to be some pain points, but overall, he's still incredibly valuable to this team.
He is. I think if there's anything I would critique with the Brook Lopez experience this particular season, it's just the minutes that he has to play nightly. Like he is averaging the most minutes he has as a Milwaukee Buck this year. This is the year where Brook Lopez has the most minutes per game of his Milwaukee Bucks career. And with that coming with him at 36, going on 37, that's probably the biggest problem that I would have with the Brook Lopez experience, because I do think he's still a very valuable player. But Frank mentioned before the All-Star break, because Brook was racking up some really high minute games at that point of just, Frank said, I think he just needs a break. I think he just needs a chance to rest for a bit, to get his feet back underneath him, to continue playing at a higher level. And you saw him come out of the break looking reinvigorated, looking pretty good. So for me, if there's one thing I would tweak with Brook Lopez going forward, it's just, can we find a way to shave off 3-4 minutes from his nightly workload going forward consistently? Because plus 30 minutes of Brook Lopez a night feels like a little bit too many right now at this point in his career.
Well, and here's the last thing I would point out too, just to, like, it's not as simple as let's look at the counting numbers and let's look at the back of the basketball card numbers. When Brook Lopez, and this number has gone down a little bit this year, which again is to be expected with a player that's a month away from turning 37 years old. But when Brook Lopez is on the floor, the Bucks are in the 91st percentile in defensive rebounding. When he is off the floor, they're in the 25th percentile. So, I get he doesn't rack up rebounds himself, but a lot of times that's by design. That's not what he's out there to do. Create the opportunities, box out. We can get annoyed with the tips, the tip outs to teammates. We saw it for more people than just Brook Lopez. And I would agree on that one. But the numbers tell you this team is much better with Brook Lopez on the floor than they are off the floor. Speaking of Brook, it's going to be a big challenge for him, and not just him, but everybody later on tonight with Nikola Jokić and the Denver Nuggets coming to town. A well-rested, by the way, Jokić and Denver Nuggets team. So Camille and I will get into that matchup and preview a big one, a national broadcast on TNT for Giannis versus Nikola Jokić. We'll do so after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, with Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. It's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk, rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Denver Nuggets come into town. They have not played since beating Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, the aforementioned Miles Turner, and the Indiana Pacers 2 nights ago. So 2 days off for the Denver Nuggets. And it's a Nuggets team that, much as we hope we're starting to see more consistently from the Bucks, they've really started to find something, because I know I took a lot of heat with Denver Nuggets fans earlier in the year when we were just talking about the Bucks lot in life versus the Denver Nuggets, and like, well, how is it much different? And both these teams were right around the same spot in the standings early in the season. Even the talk, and this, not to get too far off at a tangent, Camille, but a lot of the pushback that I heard was our core is so much better than the Bucks core. We're not as old. Are we going to fail to mention Nikola Jokić and Giannis are the separated by 2 months? Yeah, right. Jokić just had his birthday. But their big turnaround has been the fact that Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray looked, especially Jamal Murray, nowhere near the guys that they were certainly during the run to an NBA championship for the Nuggets 2 years ago, but really largely who they've been the past few years. That has rapidly turned around. And especially in the case of Jamal Murray, Denver looks every bit to be back. They've won 9 of their last 10 games, and now they're suddenly tied with the Memphis Grizzlies for the second best record in the Western Conference, and a team that was, again, similar record to the Bucks through the midpoint in December. Now they're approaching 20 games above 500.
A Nuggets team that, as you mentioned, they've won a lot of their most recent games. They got blown out by the Lakers over the weekend, which snapped their initial 9-game winning streak. And was
because Anthony Davis is gone, so there's no more of the Jokić versus Davis. So of course they're going to win now.
And the Lakers look like they really game planned for the Nuggets, which you don't typically see in a regular season game. Like, that looked more like a playoff strategy, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, after that game, hearing Jokić come out and just saying, like, we had a 9-game winning streak against teams that were injured or teams that weren't really good at that point. So maybe we're not that good. Maybe we've been thinking too much about ourselves. And the slate of games the Nuggets had after that, the Pacers, the Bucks, the Pistons, and the Celtics, this Eastern Conference road trip for them, they were looking at as like, okay, like, let's really see where we are, because looking at what Jokić said, we have played some, lesser competition, but let's see how we stack up here. And this Denver offense has been humming as of recently. To your point about what Jamal Murray's been bringing to the table, he's someone who also didn't look all the way right in the summer during the Olympics as well, but he's starting to round into form here. Michael Porter Jr., somebody who I think has just expanded how he even gets his buckets, using his physicality and his size a bit more than just being a spot-up shooter throughout most of the game. Like, their offense is clicking. Their defense, that's where you can get the Nuggets at. Yeah. So I do wonder with this Bucks matchup if the Nuggets are kind of like what the doctor ordered for their offense, because they have some weaklings you can attack defensively. So I'm really curious to see how the Bucks can respond to that, but also seeing how the Bucks defense can stand up to this Nuggets team, because as I mentioned, they have really been rolling lately.
Yeah, and it's not like I don't mean this as a knock on Jamal Murray, but Denver's offense is obviously Nikola Jokić is arguably the best offensive player in the league. And I know how much Bucks fans get up in arms if we suggest that Nikola Jokić is better or at the same level as Giannis, but it's in the conversation. He's one of the 2 best offensive players in the league. They don't really have that kind of quick twitch guy in the backcourt that's given the Bucks some problems. That's not Jamal Murray's game. So to your point about the Bucks offense, maybe this is what they need. I'm really curious to see this Bucks defense against the Denver Nuggets too, because we saw a lot of fronting and doubles on Nikola Jokić. I'm curious to see what the Bucks game plan is. And if it's, hey, we're going to do the same thing, and Michael Porter Jr. is hitting shots and Jamal Murray's hitting shots, we'll live with the consequences here. Denver's gone 20-7 since the start of this calendar year. That is the best record in the league since January 1st. And offensively, you mentioned it, second best offense in the league during that stretch. But defensively, and they're in the middle of the pack. So that was also kind of the recipe the year they won the title. They were really good offensively. Defense just slightly better than league average, just good enough. And in case you were wondering, in that same time period, the Bucks are 15-11. They have the 12th best defense in the league and the 14th best offense in the league. So they've been middle of the pack in both of those categories. But yeah, Nikola Jokić has been incredible. Jamal Murray shooting 43% on threes since January 1st. Michael Porter Jr. shooting 41%. And combined, that duo's taking about 13 threes a game. So you're going to have to be very cognizant of three-point shooting. And by the way, Nikola Jokić is having an incredible season. He's not taking a high volume, but he's knocking down at a high rate from three. So, we mentioned this on the radio pregame show. By the numbers, everything told you that game against the Rockets, this is going to be a good game. And it's probably going to be a defensive game, and it's going to go down to the wire. Famous last words, I think we're getting the same thing here. I don't think it's going to be the grinded out 100-97 affair, but again, I go back to what you said. In my hope, I would love nothing more than a 130-128 game.
Mm-hmm. I could see it going that way as well, because this feels like a formula for this Bucks offense to wake up a little bit and try to take advantage of what's in front of you. Plus, on top of that, too, it's a nationally televised game. We've talked about the schedule that the Bucks have when it comes to their nationally televised game, how it was a little bit down this year, but an opportunity for the whole nation to see what the Bucks are doing right now. So I think it's going to be a really fun one. And for the Bucks in this one, I do wonder, I mentioned it before, it's not as if the Bucks turnover numbers are like crazy coming out of the break, but they've been a little bit higher than what we've been used to seeing from this Milwaukee Bucks team. This is a Denver Nuggets team that, I'm not saying they're careless with the ball. They're almost middle of the pack with that. And I do wonder to see like if the Bucks can get out and run on this Nuggets team a little bit as well in this game. So just curious to see how this identity of the Bucks team continues to change. And again, I'm not saying like they're going to be turnover machines or anything like that, but we've been seeing them get their hands on passes a little bit more than they did before the break. And again, very, very small sample size, but curious to see how the defense looks against the Nuggets. And to your point, how they choose to play Nikola Jokić in this game.
Denver is 13th in turnover rate on offense. I think the Bucks are 7th or 8th. So they don't, I mean, contrary to what we've seen recently, turn it over all that much, but neither team forces a lot. They're both in the bottom 5 defensively. So a lot of very interesting matchups in this one tomorrow. Obviously tonight, Giannis versus Nikola Jokić is what's going to get the bulk of the attention, and rightfully so. So should be another fun one. And then on to the interesting part of the schedule coming up over the weekend in Dallas against the Mavericks. No Anthony Davis, no bigs, period, we think, for the Mavs. And then you have that stretch where you got your only 2 sets of 2 days off in between games sandwiched around a back-to-back for the Bucks and leading into another back-to-back. So truly a strange schedule in front of the Bucks here as we start to move into the month of March already. That'll do it for today's show. It should be a fun one later on tonight at Fiserv Forum for the Bucks and the Denver Nuggets. We'll have the post-game recap coming up on that one later on this evening, so be on the lookout for that. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys tomorrow once again on Locked On Bucks.